I learned some things that are kind of disturbing about the industry today, which I wanted to talk about. You know, the black market, as they call it, has been around, of course, for a long, long time, and in the marijuana world. Um, anybody who smokes weed, or somebody who smokes weed, everybody has their supplier, and you could never go to CVS and get your weed, like they have it now with all these dispensaries and all this stuff. So, but the problem is, it's becoming very corporate, and weed, in my opinion, is a culture. It's not corporate, and in doing so, they're cutting out all these black market people from coming into the business legally by making the license fees so high. Minimum license fee. They get different categories like a grower's license and micro business license and all this stuff, and like all in the range of between like 100 grand to 300 grand for a license. And then you got to go through the application process, and depending on where you are, what city or what zoning, even if you apply, you got to get selected. And I think it's their way of, no pun intended, weeding out folks from capitalizing on this gold rush that could benefit a lot of minorities, and not just even minorities, like people from the stoners from the '60s, who, like, if you go to places like Humboldt, California, where they've been basically living off the grid, living off their weed, and now they have to transition into the legal world, and they're not making it easy for them.
Well, that reminds me of something I was telling people maybe 20 years ago. You know, be hanging out at someone's house and they're playing Marley, legalize it and stuff like that. And I would tell people, you don't ever want them to legalize weed because they're just gonna make legislation to lower the THC content, and then they're gonna tax the hell out of it. And what you're describing sounds like the beginning of that. Where they're overreaching, and it's not anything for public safety. It's not anything for regulation control or quality control. It's just control of resources, and to make sure that you can keep people pinned down so they're not your competition, and not really competition for the sake of wealth or prosperity, but the competition for power. You know.
Yeah, because this is gonna empower a lot of people who, when you think, like, just even in the black community and the Latino community, and there's a lot of people that were locked up, some even for life, for possession of weed, not even for selling it, but just for possession. Under the three strikes law,
Yeah.
and I think a lot of those convictions should be overturned, and because how can you have people locked up, and then now you have Captain Corporate getting into it now, talking about, hey, we're talking about the benefits of sour diesel strain of weed, which is a energetic sativa. And I literally saw a video like that on YouTube where they were talking about it like they were talking about some new strain of penicillin. I mean, it was that corporatized. And they had people, the video, the image with people running through fields. And, if you take this has a lemony type of smell, which is kind of gives you the sour part. And, this has been very popular on the East Coast. And here's all the different names for it. They sometimes call it that sour. And, you're hearing people like try to use colloquial slang, speaking proper English. It just did not gel. It just sounded so fake.
Yeah. And I wonder who their target demographic is, because anybody who's hip on what all that is ain't going to a pharmaceutical company for their stuff. And like you said, weed is a culture, and part of that culture is community and communing with people of that same mindset, spiritually and politically. So for someone, to try to corporatize it, I don't think they've studied the people the demographic they're trying to reach very well, because corporations is almost the antithesis of marijuana culture.
Yeah, because I can't remember what it was I was watching. I was watching a show yesterday, and the guy was saying he doesn't like dispensaries, and I said, and the person said why? He said, well, they've distilled it, and it's all sterile, and I like going to a weed shop that's like a record store. It's like, and the guy back there knows what my favorite records are. In this case, what my favorite strains of weed are. Hey, you heard this new CD? You tried this new strain of weed. He's like, you go to a dispensary, it's like going to CVS. And it's like, I don't want to go to CVS for my weed. And it was just interesting to hear him say that. And this guy is actually, I think his name was NJ Weed Guy. And he actually got raided in Jersey for basically for something he shouldn't have been raided for. And he was basically complaining, that they're trying to muscle out the minorities, from this industry. um, because he was able to beat the case because legally he was in compliance, but that still didn't stop them from raiding his place of business.
Yeah, and stuff like that is used as a warning. They know that that case isn't going to stick, but by the time they trash your place and scare the hell out of you and have your neighbors watch you be handcuffed and led to a vehicle and have you overnight or for however long they had them detained, they know that for the average person, that's going to make you reconsider everything you're doing. And a lot of times that's all it really takes to get rid of the competition.
But I think that's a shame though that you've suffered all these years, gone to jail, the stigma of it, and then now you can finally do it legally and earn a decent, well, more above average living, and corporate America has jumped in and they're trying to basically corporatize it by having all these regulations. I mean, some of these regulations, are crazy. Like they were talking about a regulatory assessment fee that you got to pay if you're a grower, depending if you're a Class A grower or you're a Class C grower, and that fee is 10 grand just for the assessment fee.
Well, you know what they're doing with this emerging market is the same thing they've done with the food industry. If you want to get FDA approval, you're looking at a similar paradigm. If you make chocolate chip cookies and you want to sell chocolate chip cookies, seems like it's cut and dry, but they've done this. Once again to control who can enter the space. And this is America. This is not a singular occurrence, and it's not the first time it's happened. I mean, when you go back to the 1800s in rural America, and families owned homesteads and farms, and they farmed and brought their food to market, around about the 1870s or 80s, maybe even 1890s, corporations from back out east were strong arming people into selling their land, but to stay on and farm crops so that they can control our agriculture. And it was much the same tactics. But back then, they might have had a posse or some jayhawkers or some rustlers to come set fire to your barn and harass you. Now they have law enforcement. It's just a 21st century version of the same old song, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
But the one thing I take solace in is I look back at Prohibition, where I mean, what's more American than alcohol, right? Um, well,
Whiskey.
you know, but beer, whiskey, all that stuff. What's more American than alcohol? Well, we endured prohibition. So something was legal, then they prohibited it, and then prohibition. After the Roaring Twenties and gangsters and gunfights and all that whole period in American history. It's funny because
Al
they try to act
Capone.
like yeah, well, it's funny because they try to act like the violence in Chicago now was the first time that's ever happened. No, it's kind of the history of that city. A long, proud tradition of violence.
Right.
The Valentine Day massacre.
Right.
So don't run these headlines by me and paint a particular demographic with the jacket of violence. But to flash forward to the end of Prohibition, and then there was a time when you can advertise liquor on television. Now you can again, which is interesting to me.
Yeah.
But now you have microbrews, which people are making beer in their homes or small facilities, and they're selling them in local stores. I see that being the future of this industry. What what my mind's eye is telling me is that these people are doing this to get their foothold in it and get firmly established first. Then you can come get the
It's
sloppy
fun. It's
second.
funny you mentioned that because the micro business license allows you to grow up to 100 plants. It's basically like brewing the micro beer.
Hmm.
And you have to have between 100 and 300 grand in the bank.
Okay.
Um, because you may end up spending like 50 grand to get yourself squared, but then they want to see, okay, are you liquid in order to pay all the other expenses and all the other things that need to take place in order to run this business. But with that micro business license, it's 100 plants. So and then you can now basically grow that many. So it's interesting that you talked about the micro brewing because it seems like the regulations that we're seeing, it's going to be just like the alcohol industry, except way more stringent.
I think that might be what happens at first, but this country is essentially broke. Every financial expert and economist is predicting another recession, if not meltdown. And one of the largest sources of revenue for this nation is payroll tax. And maybe I'm a little naive, but if things get worse, they would want a lot of businesses started so they can siphon off the payroll tax since this country doesn't make anything else other than weapons. So, potentially we could see all of this as a scheme to get control of the market space and exploit it. And then, relax all that stuff once they're satisfied and let people participate freely. I mean, it's almost like any industry that starts, they do this. It's all this control. I mean, you got Blue Origin and SpaceX. You got people with spaceships now. And you couldn't have done that in the past because there were so many regulations. Um,
Yeah, but I think the regulations are getting out of hand because even if you look at Canada, where everybody's heralding Canada as the the castle in the sky, so to speak, it's actually not that glamorous because they have not been able to, even though they've legalized it completely in Canada, it's government institutions selling the marijuana so far. Private institutions have to petition for a license, and then even if you petition and you have all your requirements, it's still picking names out of a hat, and they're still having issues with meeting the supply. Like they've not been able to meet the supply. I'm sorry, meet the demand. Supply has not been able to keep up with the demand. So of course the black market is still raging, and I don't really see it going away because
no, never.
they're just not up to it. And plus, that whole cultural aspect of it, I think, is another reason. But to highlight the points you brought up, there was a girl who's just graduated college. She was 23, and she applied for this marijuana license in Saskatchewan. And out of all the corporations, out of everybody in the district or the area that she was the one that got it.
Hmm.
And people were like, "Well, what are you going to do with it?" She said, "Well, I'm going to open up my dispensary." And people were looking at her like, "Oh, you went to college so you can sell weed," So there's still that stigma attached to it. And because her father was helping her like do the build out at the store, and then she has all these corporate heads like coming, "Hey, well, can we partner? Since you don't have any experience running a business or running a store, and but you do have the license, and and she's like, "Nope, I'm doing this stuff by myself."
Yeah, that's a mistake.
So
That's a big
why
mistake
is that a mistake?
because not to get tangential. This statement is really not. People look at the mafia, La Cosa Nostra, as like these Sicilian guys that created a mob and started, you know, raining havoc upon everybody else. No, them people got that from the government. You know what I'm saying? They got that from the government. Um, whenever you look at any mob, anywhere, where there's the Triad in Hong Kong, where there's Yakuza in Japan, where there's Sicilian mob, the Russian mob, the Greek mob, even the brothers in certain places. They just did what the government was doing to them better. So they took like a conventional warfare model. They like their response to conventional warfare was guerrilla warfare.
Mm-hmm.
And that happened just repeatedly through history. And so one thing I know, when they come knocking like that, you gonna give them a piece, or they're gonna find a way to get rid of you soon. And she might have wanted to sit at the table and be like, look, I know you want a piece of the pie, but let's make this good for everybody, and let them have a piece. Because if you check up on her in 6 months, she ain't gonna be there. And that, and then, and that's the streets telling me that, Jack. You know what I'm saying? It's
That is
just
hilarious.
I understand how this works. They did, that happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Black folks who set up that city were doing so well.
Black Wall Street.
International community, other countries wanted to come do business with them, and the United States federal government said, hey, we'd like to work with you. And they were like, nah, you owned us 15, 20 years ago. We want to kind of not deal with you for a little bit. The 300 years was a monster. We're gonna leave you alone for a bit, and they were gone. So whenever they come knocking, you need to break bread with them. You need to consider the price of doing business, not that someone's infringing upon your dream, someone's going to stop you from making money. It's all, I drove around today. I have to have car insurance to do that. It don't sound right, and it isn't. But sometimes you got to pay the cost of doing business. And they might have a young lady out of business soon if she didn't want to cut them in. They have inexhaustible resources to drag you through court or have somebody burn your place down or even lay hands on you. So I just thought I'd, put that in there.